My name is Bert, and this is the Still Life Podcast. Welcome back. This is episode 3. As promised in episode 2, I brought notes today, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about peace. Let me start by saying I am not a medical professional, and anything I say is based off of my own experiences. I am by no means an expert. So with that out of the way, let's define peace. Peace is defined as freedom from disturbance or tranquility. Also, a state or period in which there is no war or a war has ended. So what that means is you can't have peace unless you first had conflict. So let's start off by talking a little bit about conflict. Conflict can come in many forms. Internally, conflict could be having to make a decision between thing A or thing B. Externally, it can come from disagreements or differences of opinion between family, friends, co-workers, significant others, or other people we may encounter in our day-to-day lives. While conflict tends to be a fairly negative thing, it can actually be used to create a positive outcome, because we can be both refined and defined through conflict, struggle, pressure, and stress. When these instances occur, it generally enacts our fight or flight response. Do we stand our ground or work to find a solution, or do we turn and run to get as far away from the conflict as possible? Certainly in life there are circumstances where both of these could be the correct answer. It all depends on what those circumstances are. There's a time to stand up and fight, there's a time to compromise, and sometimes there's a time just to turn and walk away. But whatever our response is, let's make sure that we're making the most of that response and growing through that interaction and resolution of conflict. Now, there are typically 4 outcomes once we resolve that conflict and move towards peace. The first being we have a defined winner, a defined loser. The second, we have both a winner and loser that are undefined. The third, we have 2 people who have reached an agreement and both win. Or we have people that were unable to resolve their conflict and have both lost. And while it's always great to win, sometimes winning isn't the best option or the best way through which we achieve personal growth. As we learn to problem solve and navigate through conflict, whether it be personally, on the job, through sports, or even in the military through physical conflict or confrontation, we have the ability to learn new skills and add useful tools to our toolbox by learning to effectively deal with conflict and reach resolution and ultimately peace. Now, unfortunately for most of us, there are periods of conflict that aren't short-term. We could be talking days, weeks, months, or even years. So how do we find peace in the midst of the conflict and struggle? For me, internally, it's learning to turn my brain off. I love the outdoors and I love fishing. So for me to find peace, even in the midst of or after I've resolved conflict and am searching for that peace, I'll go out fishing. For me, there's nothing like the calm of just standing there, throwing your line out, and reeling it back in. Oftentimes, it's not really about catching the fish, but just unplugging from everything, turning my brain off, and recharging my batteries a little bit. For some, it could be spending time with friends or loved ones. It could be watching a movie or diving into a book. We all have different ways of finding that peace both during and post-conflict. Not sure what works for you? This may be a time to investigate some different opportunities, whether it's going for a walk in nature, doing what I do, going fishing, listening to music, watching a movie, or starting a new book. If you can reach peace internally, even in the midst of conflict, you've learned something. Now, peace itself can happen in many ways. Through time, compromise, acknowledgement, communication, and healing. Even though the conflict is over, doesn't mean that we have peace. Sometimes it just takes time to work through and get over things in our head. Sometimes it's making that compromise with ourselves or with others to move forward. And that's also where communication comes in. Acknowledgement of what happened, what we did well, and what we can do better can sometimes bring peace after the conflict has ended. And lastly, through the healing process. Now, oftentimes, peace and healing tend to go hand in hand. When we reach peace, sometimes we have healed, and sometimes that's where the healing begins. Even though sometimes there may be a scar left behind to remind us of the traumatic incident or the conflict that we've endured, we oftentimes find that peace and that healing at the end of our journey. We all know the old adage, time heals all wounds. And while that's true to a degree, I certainly hope that I can find peace and healing long before my time is up. And with that, I'd like to thank you for taking some time out of your day to join me on the Still Life podcast. As always, for questions, comments, topic ideas, or to be a sponsor of the Still Life podcast, please email us, thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. That's thestilllifepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.